Now we're going to talk about value contracts. So a quantity contract is a contract based on the total quantity that we are going to procure from a particular vendor. A value contract is based on a total value. So it's dollar, say 500,000 per year of what? You could list whatever you want depending on how much you negotiated. So for this amount of purchase, the vendor could offer $8.50 per pound of coffee and some other price for flour, some other price for sugar, depending on his economics, right? And then you're going to consume this value contract through release orders, just like the way we have done it for quantity contracts. So let's create a value contract for 50,000 per year, and we can put in coffee at $8.50 per pound, and you could have more products if you want. The way to do that is go to contract, create. Everything remains the same except we are going to change the agreement type from a quantity contract to a value contract, like so. So this is a quantity contract, and this is a value contract. So select a value contract, and of course select vendor of 4001 and create OK. The validity is going to be for 1 year, and here we specify the target value. Now remember, target value is not at the line item level. It's including all the lines in the contract. So we're going to specify it at the header, not at the line item. With a quantity contract, we had to specify quantities at the line item level. 50,000 pounds of coffee, that means at the line item. Here we are not specifying the value for a particular product. Instead, we are saying the total value that we are procuring is 500,000 USD. Now, in that 500,000, you could specify coffee beans, right, at say $8.50 per pound, right? Now remember, it's not asking you for the quantity because it doesn't care. You could procure as much quantity as you want, and the price is going to be $8.50 because the overall commitment is for buying $500,000 worth of coffee, flour, sugar, anything that you have negotiated with the vendor. Save it, and note down the value contract, right? If you don't want to note down, then what you can do is you can go to change or display mode, search for the contract by going here and putting in the vendor, right? 4001 US 01, and these are all the different contracts that we have, and you can specify the value contract. You can just double click it like so, right? Double click and hit enter, and you'll see the contract there. Now you want to release this contract, right, and create a PO. So go to follow on functions, click on contract release order, and instead of adopting this contract with the adopt button, you can also adopt the data by dragging and dropping into this basket. Alright, and what's the quantity that I want to purchase? Say 100. And you see the price? 850. Now, it's not just the price. Let me do something. Let me go back to that contract. Let me cancel this. Do you want to save it? No. And go to the contract in change mode. And at the header, click on this header. This is the header. At the header, I'm going to say the terms for this is not net 30, because we don't want to pay within 30 days. We want to pay, say, within 60 days. Okay, we want to increase the amount of credit time that we are going to get. Instead of net 30, we're going to say net 60. Okay, so net 60 is our payment terms. Now by default, say it's net 30, meaning the default payment terms with the vendor 4001 is net 30. But in this contract, we want a little bit more leeway, more freedom. So say we have negotiated a payment terms of 60 days, meaning from the time we receive the invoice, we have 60 days to pay instead of 30. Now save it. Now if we create a purchase order with that vendor, a standalone purchase order without referring to this contract, what is the payment terms? So go create the purchase order with this vendor, and if you go to the document header and go to delivery invoice tab, what is the payment terms? 30. Where does this come from? This comes from the vendor. If you double click this vendor and go to the financial data, what is the payment term there? Net 30. So by default, when you create a purchase order, the terms could be payment terms, Incoterms, any of these conditions. They're typically defaulted from the vendor, if not from the purchase info record. But when you refer a contract, you want to save it? No. Go to the contract and release with reference to that contract. And when you drag and drop this contract into the purchase order for a quantity of 100, say, now go to the header and see what the payment terms are. You see, the payment terms are 60, net 60. So what does this tell you? This should tell you that the terms that are negotiated with the vendor are not just the price. Like we discussed in one of the previous chapters, it could be payment terms, Incoterms, or any of the terms that dictate how that purchase order behaves. So let's continue with our release order. So we have a release order for 100 and save it. Now if you go back to the contract and look at the release documentation for that line item 10, See, a quantity of 100 has been released for the Chicago plant, company code US01, and the value for that is 850. So out of a total of 500,000, we have released a value of 850. Right? Where do you see the target quantity? Here. And where do you see the release quantity? In the release documentation at the line item level. So that is a value contract. So let's summarize what we have learned so far. We were talking about outline agreements, and we said there are two types of outline agreements. One is contracts, another is scheduling agreements. In contracts, we have talked about a quantity contract and we have talked about a value contract. Now in the next chapter, we're going to talk about scheduling agreements. So what's a scheduling agreement? Scheduling agreement is very similar to a contract, and that's the reason why we have classified them as outline agreements. But what is the difference? The difference is, in a scheduling agreement, we're going to have a schedule of when the vendor is going to deliver what. That's a scheduling agreement. So if you want coffee at say 100 pounds a week, so we're going to say 100 pounds per week, 100 this week, 100 next week, 100 next week, and we are going to specify the dates. That's a scheduling agreement. Now, why do we need a scheduling agreement as opposed to a contract? Now, for a coffee shop, this has very limited use. The probable reason that I can think of is, anyway we require 100 pounds per week. So instead of creating purchase order every week for 100 pounds referring to that contract, we could create a scheduling agreement which will tell the vendor that we need 100 pounds per week. That's a simple use case for using scheduling agreement in our coffee shop. But a scheduling agreement is used more in conjunction with MRP, which we have not covered, so we are not going to talk about now, in a manufacturing industry. Say Honda has a manufacturing plant, it's an assembly line, and it has hundreds of suppliers. Suppliers supplying different kinds of materials for the car or the engine. Now the assembly line goes at a particular speed, 10 cars per day or 100 cars per day. And to produce 100 cars per day, you require so many parts, and it's fixed, right? Each car has an engine. Each car has 4 doors or 5 doors, 4 wheels, 2 axles. So the components by car is fixed. And if you fix the output, which is say 10 cars per day, you require so many parts per day. And creating a purchase order every day is very cumbersome, right? Because it's an assembly line that continuously manufactures cars. You know what your desired output is, so you know what your procurement plan is, how many you require per day or per week. In cases like that, you could use a scheduling agreement, whereby you send this agreement to the vendor saying, deliver me these quantities at these dates at these prices. So apart from quantities that we dictate in contracts, in a scheduling agreement, you also dictate the schedule. the schedule of delivery. That's why it's called as a scheduling agreement. So let's go create one. How do you do that? Close contracts and open scheduling agreements. Create vendor unknown, and for vendor 4001, agreement type is scheduling agreement, LP. So LPA is more involved, so let's not go there. Let's just select scheduling agreement, right? And for US01 company code, valid for 1 year, right? And coffee beans. Target, what's the target? For 1 year, we want to procure 50,000 pounds, right? And we want to procure them for the Chicago plant. Now, when you create a scheduling agreement, it's specifically asking you for the plant, right? Why? Because a schedule can only be created for a plant. When you give a schedule, you have to also tell the vendor where you have to deliver them. And that's why it's asking you specifically for the plant. Now, net price $9, say, right? Go click save. So copy this scheduling agreement. Now, we said the difference between a contract and scheduling agreement is that a scheduling agreement has a schedule of delivery. But so far it was very similar to a contract, right? We created a scheduling agreement, we put the quantity in there, we put the price, we put the plant, but we didn't specify the schedule, did we? So where do we specify the schedule? Go to delivery schedule and click on maintain. Enter your scheduling agreement number and select that line item and click on the delivery schedule. Here we're going to put a date. Now today is a Monday, 19th September 2016. Now let's say every Monday, 7 days from now, we need 100 pounds of coffee. Okay, 19, 26, 3, so on and so forth. So 19, we need a quantity of 100, right? And on what's the next date? 26. And on 26, we need another 100 pounds, so on and so forth. You get the picture, right? And it's saying the delivery date be met? Well, let's say it can be met. Okay, we'll talk about that later. So we have created two schedule lines, and let's assume we have created schedule lines for the entire month or entire year, right? Just more lines here, every week 100, 200 or 100, whatever quantity. And it also shows you the cumulated quantity, right? So what is the total cumulated quantity that we have ordered so far? Save this guy. Now the vendor knows when to deliver and how much to deliver. So the beauty of the scheduling agreement is you don't need to create a release order. No need to create release orders every time you need coffee. You already told him the times that you need and the quantities that you need. All you need to do is go to MyGo, which is goods receipt. So enter your scheduling agreement, hit enter, and see SAP automatically knows that on this day, the vendor is supposed to deliver 200. So did he deliver all the 200? Maybe he did. Where did he deliver it to? To our coffee storage location. Say item OK and click save. And you could take it further, create an invoice. Now, if you go back to the scheduling agreement, and if you look at the scheduling agreement, scroll a little to the right, and then you should see that we have received goods for a quantity of 200, 100 plus 100, which was supposed to be delivered today, 9/19/2016. And on 9/26, when the next delivery comes in, you could take a goods receipt for that, and the open quantity of 100 would switch to the GR quantity. Right? So it's just a way for SAP to track what's happening to the scheduling agreement. Now this is similar to the way a value contract or a quantity contract tracks how much has been released in terms of value or in terms of quantity of that contract. So that's a scheduling agreement. So we have created a simple scheduling agreement of type LP, and we have specified a schedule. I need $100 on the first Monday, the second Monday, third Monday, fourth Monday, so on and so forth. And when the time comes, just do a MyGo for this. And if you go back to the scheduling agreement, you can see that the status for that line item will change from open quantity to goods received. So that's a scheduling agreement. So scheduling agreements and contracts are the two types of outline agreements that are used in SAP. Both are very similar, contracts and scheduling agreements. A contract specifies either a value or a volume of how much can be procured within a particular time. A scheduling agreement also specifies the dates for deliveries so that you don't have to explicitly create release orders on particular dates. So contracts give you flexibility, meaning you can create the purchase orders when you require, as long as you're able to procure the total that you promised the vendor within that particular time. Scheduling agreements do not give you that freedom, but instead gives you the freedom from having to create release orders, POs, every week, for example. So if your procurement goes like clockwork, every week 100 pounds, every week 200 pounds, then you can use a scheduling agreement. If not, you can very well go with contracts. And these are the different kinds of outline agreements.